as smart as he usually is.
Brown drives, scoop layup off the glass.
That's not the first time we've seen a superstar in green and white sacrifice the body.
Garnett, knocked away.
Welcome into another episode of First to the Floor. Ben Vallis here. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're doing well. We are sliding into full-on off-season mode tonight as we look back at the most significant Celtics moments since the massive Brooklyn trade that happened almost exactly 10 years ago. Alongside me, as always, it's Wayne Spooney. Spooney, what's going on, man?
I'm doing good, Ben. If you're watching on YouTube, I am hatted. We're bouncing around the idea if like I should become the hat guy of the podcast, but really it's just because I golfed and my hair looks like I got electrocuted, basically.
Yeah, almost 6 years of doing the pod. We've never had a hat guy, yeah. So I for one welcome our new hat overlord. So welcome, Spooney. So look, this is the way this is going to work. We're taking turns and we're going to rattle these off in order of reverse importance. So the idea is that hopefully we culminate with the most major, shit-hot, important Celtics event in the last 10 years. But unlike Pokemon, we're not going to catch them all. So we're going to need you in the comments. Let us know what we've missed because there's going to be plenty of time, I think we're safe to say, to circle back on this throughout the offseason, the very long offseason. Before we get started, a quick recap of the Brooklyn trade, which is sort of like the pre-starting point of for our launching point here. So the Brooklyn trade, basically 10 years ago, happened in the summer of 2013 in July there. KG, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, who I believe not long before that had a Celtics tattoo put on his calf muscle there. I don't know if it's still there. You can get that stuff removed pretty easily nowadays. Those guys shipped out for Gerald Wallace, Kris Humphries. You're going to have to help me with this one, Spoony. Tornike Shengelia, Reggie Evans. Yeah,
that name does not ring a bell at all as being part of that trade, dude.
I had to cross-reference that to make sure that I wasn't being trolled by The Athletic or wherever I pulled this information from. Keith Bogans, who I think played Summer League that year as an older gentleman. Chris Joseph, unprotected firsts in 2014, 2016, and 2018, and a pick swap in the 2017 draft. Spoony, before we get to it, I'll quiz you. Who did the Celtics draft with each of those Brooklyn picks? And I think the Jays, we can scratch those. We know what picks they used to draft the Jays. Do you have any idea at all? Because
James Young.
Yes, in 2014. Cue the Bill Simmons fist pump.
So a swap. Was Rozier one?
He was not.
Okay. So James Young, the Jays. We traded one of them. So I'm missing one.
Yeah, so I'll just run through it chronologically because it's a crazy mouthful. So yeah, 2016, Jaylen Brown, and then Yabu at 16.
Oh, Yabu, yeah.
That was with the Dallas pick acquired in the Rondo trade.
Oh, God.
And then Ante Zizic at 23 with their own pick. 2017, Tatum. The Nets drafted Kyle Kuzma with the swap, who was then traded to the Lakers for D'Angelo Russell and Timothy Mozgov. Then 2018, the Cavs drafted Colin Sexton with that Brooklyn pick that was acquired in the trade with that trade centered around Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie Irving. And then the Celtics drafted Robert Williams at 27 with their own pick. So a real pick mishmash there.
Those are the peak Ainge days right there, man. Taking 3-4 picks a draft. I loved it.
Absolutely. Just a crazy intertwined network of picks and trades that happened as a result of the Brooklyn trade there. So, Spoony, I'm going to allow you to kick things off, and we're just going to start with the smaller, finer points and work our way up to some of the more significant moments that happened in the last 10 years. So what do you got for us?
It was very difficult for me to not just almost go in order kind of how the events unfolded, but this one is a throwback. I think it's what really kicked off this new era of winning basketball, and it's the Isaiah Thomas trade. Not for Kyrie, when we acquired Isaiah Thomas and Danny Ainge was like, I got my guy, and everyone's like, what is he talking about? And then IT bursts on the scene, man, gets thrown out of his first game, I think, against the Lakers, tore it up, averaged 20 a game coming off the bench, and that team was well below under 500. And then when IT came on, we ripped off a 14-7 run into the playoffs before promptly getting obliterated by LeBron and the Cavs. But still, that was like, oh, are the Celtics kind of back? Are we fun again? This is great. So I remember that's why I joined Reddit when we made that trade and started playing so well, because I just needed to talk about it with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe it was it Marcus Thornton and a second round pick?
Yeah,
For
crazy.
Isaiah Thomas. And yeah, like we always talk about at the end of each season and going into each season on this podcast, like everything, the enjoyment is relative to expectations. And acquiring Isaiah Thomas for essentially nothing, not to shit on Marcus Thornton and whoever was acquired with a second round pick, but it was basically nothing. And then to make the playoffs after like almost certainly being basically a tanking team led by, Marcus Smart and Jeff Green and Kelly Olynyk. Huge, a lot of fun. I'd had way later in my sheet of importance, like just Isaiah Thomas in general.
Fair.
We'll get to more Isaiah Thomas stuff, but that's huge. Mine is far less important. I obviously started way down the totem pole of importance than you. I've just got eliminating Philly many times in the playoffs throughout the last few years, and I'll start with actually pre-trade. Okay, so 2012, the Celtics win in Game 7 there. Then 2018, the Celtics win in 5 games, again eliminating Philly in the second round. It was also the second round in 2012, in case you were wondering. 2020, the bubble sweep, first round. Yes, they were missing Ben Simmons, but they did have Al Horford. He did have that moment where he like dunked and like screamed into the camera, and I was like, oh no, the Al Horford situation is going to come back to bite us. It did not. We swept them in the bubble. And then 2023, second round, 7 games, Tatum explosion, end of Game 6, feeding into his 50-burger as the Celtics win in Game 7. Just eliminating Philly. The Schadenfreude report is such a huge part of this podcast. The hatred towards Philly is kind of like the underlying soul and life force of this podcast, at least from my perspective. And so to have successfully eliminated them so many times in the playoffs since the Brooklyn trade and never been eliminated by them, I don't believe, is very satisfying. So I think that's an important part of the culture. It's an important part of the team, and it's worth highlighting in this podcast.
Yeah, that's a 2012 series. I remember being kind of terrifying though, because I think they sort of had us on the ropes. But I'm pretty sure the last time Philly beat us in the playoffs was like 1981 or something crazy like that. It has been that long. Yeah, man, like it's great. It just feels good to own Philadelphia, especially with all the buzz and how Embiid's really a media darling. And Tatum, I think, is getting underrated at this point with how some people talk about him, at least media wise. I think like all NBA voting, absolutely not underrated in that sense. But so yeah, it's just the best. I hate that city, man.
Yeah, everything about them.
Yeah,
sports teams, everything. Who've you got next?
Okay. I don't know how we define importance here. So I've just kind of,
it's very loose.
Yeah. Like what felt like either if it's a moment that like signified something larger, like encapsulated, right? So I've got 2018 Game 7, Tatum dunking on LeBron as a rookie, because it just felt like, and we'll get, I also have the playoff run a little later, but it was sort of a cap off to what was an absurd run with 2 stars injured, Kyrie and Hayward. These 2 young, the Jays are dragging us through the playoffs, and Terry Rozier, and we're down 4, and then in the fourth quarter we can't buy a bucket, and Tatum just bangs it on LeBron and chest bumps him to pull within 2. So man, I wanted to win that game. It sucks we did not, but that is like an iconic moment that we will see for the rest of Tatum's career. You know what I mean? That'll be in like the Hall of Fame montage.
Yeah, I've got the clip here. I think in multiple languages too. Let's check it out.
Celtics with 67 points with 6:45 remaining. Tatum drives down and throws it down. Wow!
www.ticket360, minha mãe do céu! Peitou o LeBron ainda, hein? Feroz!
So much more emphatic in other languages. Shout out to Mike Breen though. Awesome moment. I think not defining significant or important or whatever the sort of the hanging word or theme for this podcast is kind of good, because it kind of, as we go through it, we can sort of determine what's important to each of us as individual Celtics fans. So I did have the dunk on LeBron. Again, way further down my list. So zooming out quite a lot. November 9, 2013, I've got the Jeff Green buzzer beater. So it also involves LeBron James on the Heat there. Let's check it out.
Eric Spoelstra subbing in.
Chalmers now for Battier.
He goes small. You'd be surprised taking Battier out of the game, but he wants a small guy on Avery Bradley.
Anderson, the big guy on the inbounds pass. Wallace looking. Loops it into Jeff Green. Gets a shot off. Got it! Jeff Green knocks down a three!
So first of all, vintage Mike Gorman call.
All-time Gorman call. All-time.
Amazing lob pass over the world by Gerald Wallace. And then just maybe the first glimmer of hope, success, something in this early Brad Stevens career, post Brooklyn trade, where all of our hopes and dreams are shipped off to Brooklyn to fight another battle elsewhere. And then suddenly we're going against the Heatles, and Gerald Wallace is throwing an insane pass to Jeff Green, who was acquired controversially, a couple of years back, shipping out Kendrick Perkins to hit a game winner over an outstretched arm of LeBron James. Incredible moment, and set the tone, I think, for Brad Stevens exceeding expectations with subpar rosters.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, not on this one I have, but on the next one. So I've got Derek White's tip in at the buzzer, game 7.
Okay.
And I think it's or game 6 rather. I think it sort of feels less important because we didn't end up winning that series, but the fact that we almost crawled back after being down 0-3, it is truly one of the craziest buzzer beaters in NBA history. I mean, to get a tip like that after coughing up the lead, basically ending your season, and then Derek White swoops in out of nowhere. It was just an awesome moment. Sometimes you just got to enjoy wow, that was really, really damn cool what I just watched. And, it would have been great if we had won game 7. It would obviously mean a hell of a lot more if we did, but it just felt like Derek White rules, and I'm so glad he's locked up long term, because I think as this goes on, that will become more and more important, because I think Derek White, we just traded Marcus Smart, and I think because we believe in Derek White so much. So it was super fun, man. It was just really cool.
Yeah, I didn't put that on my list only because I can't go back and watch it yet. And we talked about it when it happened. We better win fucking game 7, because if we don't, it's going to be buried in I don't know what you call it, my brain is failing me in this moment. Limbo.
There we go.
Celtics highlight limbo. Jeez. It's early here in Australia, and I may have been up all night monitoring rain weather patterns in Manchester, England, as I wanted to ensure that Australia won the Ashes by default after that match was rained out. So apologies. Yeah, the Derek White buzzer beater, huge, and absolutely one of the most insane buzzer beaters ever. And check out Jake Eisenberg's Twitter. If you haven't already, there's this clip of him running out into the hills of rural Tasmania right after it happened, recording his reaction to the play. It's very, very good. My next most important, this is more culturally, for the culture of the Celtics, is this guy, Scary Terry. Again, all about expectations and the fact that, we had Gordon Hayward out injured, we had Kyrie Irving out injured, and this early iteration of the hospital Celtics steps up, and Scary Terry, I do have some clips here that I should run. Here we go. Just stepped up and absolutely took it to, I think, Eric Bledsoe may be rated as a better point guard going into this series, and partially because Scary Terry Rozier was yet to sort of prove himself just due to a lack of role and lack of minutes to that point in his career. And he absolutely stepped up. If you're listening to this later, we're watching some of the highlights of that game 1 against the Bucks, where he just absolutely tortured Eric Bledsoe. Then in the post-game interview, refers to him as Drew Bledsoe, which we later learned was sort of mistakenly and just sort of an absent-minded comment. But amazing diss at the time, and a lot of fun. So Scary Terry, I've got the T-shirt somewhere in my wardrobe, culturally as a Celtics fan, and again, just with the expectations not being a championship at that point, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry was uniquely exciting in how he played basketball. Those crazy overhand crossovers, pretty explosive to the rim, and he runs really hot and cold with the with the jump shot, but when it's hot, man, he hits absolutely everything. And like he undressed Bledsoe. Bledsoe was out of his shoes, man. Like he literally didn't even bother contesting because he got stepped back so hard. He just stood there at the foul line, like, please miss this shot, Terry Rozier. And he did not. And then I think we had Drew Bledsoe in the building for the next game at home too. Yeah. So that was a nice little cherry on top as well.
Oh, so good. All right. What do you got next? We're going to rush through some of these.
Okay. I said we'll address Brad Stevens being amazing probably several times throughout this, but this, in my opinion, is Brad Stevens' crowning achievement as a coach. Truly one of the most difficult things a coach could possibly do. Jordan Crawford winning player of the week.
Oh, I had this next. Amazing.
Really nice.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Like the way you can come in as a rookie coach and just figure out like this dude who kind of been cast aside. Nobody really wanted him. He ends up on this team of misfit toys that is that Celtics team. And he plays really, really well and never played that well again his entire career. I think we traded him for 2 seconds to the Warriors and he was out of the NBA in like a year and a half. And I don't think he got injured. He was just Jordan Crawford. So, I truly like, I'm kind of joking that it's his crowning achievement as a coach, but it was legitimately impressive the way he came in from day one with that horrible team and got them playing really like attractive and fun basketball and defending because that team had actually a pretty decent defense. So I did. And that was just like, what is going on right now? This is kind of cool. You know,
I remember it so well.
Yeah.
Jackson on this podcast, he hangs his hat on Jordan Crawford, player of the week 2013, still to this day. Some other notable players of the week / month / mid-season awards for the Celtics. So we had Jordan Crawford, December 9, 2013. Jared Sullinger, February 10, 2014, also got player of the week under Brad Stevens. That's maybe another deep offseason, like deep cut pod is like all the players who peaked unexpectedly under Brad Stevens, because there's a pretty long list there. Marcus Smart, rookie of the month in February 2015, and then Derek White, player of the week, February 2023. So a pretty dry 8 years there. But we did have, we did have rookies of the year and stuff like that with the Jays coming in. But that's to be expected. All right, next one I've got is the Kemba Walker
When
signing.
free agency opens on Sunday night, the Celtics have emerged as a strong frontrunner to sign Kemba Walker from the Charlotte Hornets. Boston can continue to clear some cap space. They could renounce Terry Rozier, create a number that gets up to Kemba Walker's max. But right now, Boston and Kemba Walker are focused on each other, and there's a very strong possibility that Kemba Walker will replace Kyrie Irving.
First of all, thanks to Nathaniel Cranshaw for keeping us abreast of the Red Sox score live in the chat here on the live stream. Thanks, Nathaniel. So the Kemba Walker signing, a couple of things. Like obviously, like if you look back on it now, it was kind of like a bridging the gap situation. And I think that's a good thing now in hindsight. So we moved on from the Kyrie Irving toxic situation. Kemba Walker, ear-to-ear smile, all vibes, comes in as the Jays are in there. So the rookiehood, for lack of a better term, is like infancy. And then the next couple of years is like NBA ascendance, adolescence. And to have a mentor like Kemba Walker in your ear around at that time, I think is perfect for your growth and development as a person, as a professional, as a basketball player. And I think we have that to be thankful for Kemba. Obviously, championships weren't won, although we did have good moments. But I just think as far as the Jays' development, I think that's the focal point for the value that Kemba Walker brought.
And think about where we were. Kyrie left. Al Horford left. It was dark, man. We were like, oh my God, are we going to have to rebuild now with both of these guys out the door and Gordon Hayward on one leg? Like, what is about to happen? And then Kemba comes in. Yeah, I think you're spot on, Ben. I had this one a little bit further down, but pretty close. Like the Jays were not ready yet, but Kemba was like the mentor that brought them up to speed on what it means to be like an NBA star. And I'm not sure they're this type of player without Kemba, and Kemba getting them deep into the playoffs, and Kemba just kind of absorbing all the pressure early on and letting those two grow, because they both exploded that year with Kemba. I mean, Tatum had a pretty bad sophomore season. I mean, it was 16 points, pretty inefficient. Like, his career could have gone a different way. And Jalen was really, I wouldn't say he came out of nowhere, but he was not, nobody thought he was going to be like where he's at now. And then Kemba comes in, they both average over 20 points a game. And it's like the proof of concept. You needed to surround them with talent. It's like, okay, can we build around these guys? And you can't figure that out if you're winning 30 games. And Kemba allowed us to figure it out, and everything's kind of flowed from there.
Yeah, you say Kemba allowed us to figure out, like, he was quite graceful in, like, he obviously became more and more injured and more hampered by his knee injury as his Celtics career progressed. And he was very graceful in turning the keys over to the Jays and allowing them to run more of the offense rather than it becoming a thing. Like, you can think of certain other point guards, like the one that Kemba replaced, who would have an ego such that they wouldn't gracefully or in any way allow that to happen as well. So, a huge tip of the cap to Kemba Walker and his character and who he was as a person, and just little things like Grant Williams living with Kemba Walker during the pandemic, pre-bubble, stuff like that. I thought that was all pretty good. So fond memories of Kemba Walker. What have you got next for us, Spoonie?
So the Derek White trade.
Ooh.
So we were not very good, right? 2 years ago in the first half of the season. And then we start to turn it around, and Brad's like, I got to add to this team, because there was some question of like, should we just sell, punt this year, tank? Who knows? I mean, there was a lot of ideas floating around when we were 3 games under 500 in January. But they had that little mini run heading into the trade deadline. And then Brad brings in Derek White. The defense completely takes off with the additional White, and it leads to a finals run. And I don't think they would, Derek White had an up and down playoffs, and that might be putting it nicely, but they don't make the finals without him. I mean, he still had plenty of important moments and important games in that run. And he's under a really, really cheap contract for 2 more years after this one, I believe. So I just think that was a home run trade and was the exact type of player the Jays need around them now that they have ascended to that star status.
Yeah, I had this in my honorable mentions, but it's definitely worth bringing up just because if you look back at like turning points, and there's a few notable ones, some that we've already gotten to and some we're yet to get to, the Derek White trade. And, this term has been used so many times already, but just the addition of that connective tissue and the fact now that the evolution is like he's about to go into this upcoming season as our starting point guard. Clearly he emerged between Brogdon, Smart, and himself as the better point guard of that rotation. So the fact that we acquired him for so very little, and now he's going to be playing such a crucial role. He tipped in that game winner that we mentioned a few spots ago, Spoonie. Like, he's been incredible for the team. And we also talked about when Smart and Grant Williams were shipped out recently, like who's in our top 3-5 list of players that are most fun to cheer for. And Derek White, with like leading the league or coming close to it in charges taken, being all defensive second team, being a hustle guy, like he's at the top of, I think, a lot of people's lists as far as like who's just like fun to cheer for, who carries the torch for Marcus as far as like Celtics culture and things like that. We're looking forward to his newfound aerodynamicism. Is that a word? Having gone ball recently. So a lot to love about Derek White, and kind of been easy to pull the trigger on that trade for Brad Stevens. So
real quick before we move on, how are you going to look at Jake in the eyes leaving off the Derek White trade from your list, Ben? He's going to be so mad at you.
I mean, I'll send him my run sheet. It's there. It's there in small italics at the bottom of my list. If we had time, we were going to get to honorable mentions, and it was there. So anyway, maybe we can just cut all this out, and he'll be none the wiser. Hopefully he's not watching. I believe Jake is somewhere in Albania at the moment. So shout out to Jake, who will be back at the end of this month on the pod. All right, sticking with trades, I've got the Rondo trade, which can't have been easy to pull the trigger on. I believe when we shipped out KG, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, the move was to build around Rondo, who to that point, he had recently torn his ACL, but he had shown himself, at least as far as like how the NBA game was played in those days, to be a player you could potentially at least explore building around. That did not work. I don't believe he gelled very well with Brad Stevens, and the Celtics ended up shipping him out for Dwight Powell, this is to Dallas, for Brandon Wright, Jay Crowder, Jameer Nelson, and draft picks. And the Celtics also received that first-round pick that we mentioned earlier, who I believe drafted Yabu.
Yeah, it was Yabu,
I could be wrong.
I think, yeah.
And a second rounder in 2016, as well as a $12.9 million trade exception. So basically, they shipped him off, rather, for change. It seemed like nothing at the time, but obviously Jay Crowder went on to be a key starter and rotational piece for years to come. And it allowed us to enact basically a cultural reset, which maybe we didn't realize was super necessary at the time. Totally was. And it's all blue. Well, not all blue skies from there, but things got better
close,
from there.
though. Yeah, things got a lot better from there. That was such a bizarre year, dude. Like Rondo hunting all those assists. I remember he like wouldn't take layups and would pass it off even though he's wide open.
Why?
Like I just think as a giant middle finger, like so Brad and Carlisle, I think are similar in that they like, they have a system, like a very specific system that you should be running. And Rondo doesn't play basketball like that, for better or worse. Like he's a genius, right? And sometimes the best thing to do is just roll the ball out to him and let him play make. But Brad Stevens just isn't going to do that. And neither would Carlisle. And he was a disaster with Brad, and he was a disaster. I mean, he wasn't a disaster with Brad. He still put up numbers, but it was just bizarre and we were terrible. And it was a great move. Crowder ended up being awesome. I wish we could have kept Dwight Powell. We moved on from him really quick. I think he went back to Dallas immediately, but yeah. So yeah, good trade, had to be done. It was sort of the last, like you got to rip the Band-Aid off from that previous era. He was like the real last holdover, and we finally, moved on.
What do you got next for us, Spoonie?
Tatum's 51 against Philly.
Oh,
I don't know does that higher up for you, or is it not on there?
I didn't have it. Like, I think that was just encapsulated in eliminating Philly from the playoffs.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah. So we don't have to, I mean, it was just an incredible performance. I mean, like what we've talked about it enough, so I won't belabor the point, but yeah, that was really awesome.
It was really awesome. I fully agree. Also stamp it with that label. And so many notable, awesome Tatum playoff games, which I don't have for the rest of my list. I've got like more holistic, like, and I don't want to spoil it, but I don't have individual games. But, given the recency of that, given the tying in with eliminating the motherfucking 76ers from the playoffs, I think it's a worthy bring up. All right, I've got signing Gordon Hayward and Al Horford, different years in free agency. And the reason that I've coupled these together is because there has sort of been this ongoing narrative, both within the Celtics fan base and especially outside of it, that it's not a attractive destination for free agents. And we have seen that be the case with letting Kevin Durant, for example, slip through our fingers, despite the notable display of Tom Brady and Kelly Olynyk arriving at that meeting in the Hamptons famously years ago to try and convince him otherwise. The fact that Horford and Hayward, have signed in free agency for the Celtics, I think helps us realize that there's a culture aspect to the Celtics that outplays the weather aspect, essentially, when compared to other cities like Miami and LA. And that if we do have a good culture, we do have an excellent fan base, and that's been a notable remark from anyone who's signed here or played here. And I think it helps us as Celtics fans kind of like not feel like we're doomed, especially now where, this would obviously be a great situation for Damian Lillard to rock up and compete for a championship, even if we did have to ship out, say, Jaylen Brown as part of a trade. But despite that, he'd rather go to Miami, where he has probably a lesser chance of winning a championship, just because, environmentally, habitually living in a place like Miami, it's just much more comfortable, which you can't blame the guy for. So to hear that, in recent years, we've had guys sign in Boston because of the culture, because of that winning standard, I think helps me sleep at night as a Celtics fan. And while the Gordon Hayward thing didn't work out, I think if Al Horford were to retire at the, now, we would look back on him as a Celtic. I think he's had a more meaningful Celtic career than he did as a Hawk, certainly as a Sixer or a OKC Thunder.
Yeah, I think the Hawks kind of hate him from last I remember, the Hawks
Yeah.
fans, because he was like, I went to Boston because the fans are way better. Like,
Yeah.
that's pretty ruthless to say to your former team, and I absolutely love it, Al. I had Hayward on my honorable mentions just because like we really only got one good season out of him. You know what I mean? And it kind of ended not ugly, but he declined an option and left. Like that's kind of an FU to Boston. So, but Horford, I had it a couple spots higher than you because I think you say like, oh, it showed us that Boston has a culture. Al Horford is that culture at this point. You know what I mean? Like he has his fingerprints all over the Jays, all over this whole team. And it was really just such a seismic shift to bring in Horford and pair him with IT. So yeah, Horford way up there for me. Hayward, it's just kind of, I see why you combined them. That makes sense to me to combine them, but I think Hayward is a pretty solid step less important than Horford to me.
Well, also you remember that the Heat were jockeying for Hayward as well at that time, and they had those banners. I don't know what the street is called in Miami, but I guess it's as you drive towards their front office building or their arena, and they did not get him. And as much as I like shitting on the Sixers, I also love to shit on Miami as well. So good fun.
Maybe more so at this point.
Yeah, totally.
It's just harder.
Yeah.
So my next one, this is boring because I've had to cross a few off. So I'm just Tatum's 46 against Milwaukee, right? Down 3-2. You're the best team in basketball for half the season. Everyone's picking you to go to the finals or win the finals, and you lose at home in heartbreaking fashion with that horrible Smart turnover. And everyone's like, oh man, they're going to lose. The Celtics are going to choke. Chris Middleton's hurt. And then Tatum just shows up and drops 46 on Giannis's head, brings us back home, and we blow them out and end up making the finals. So I think that's like an iconic Tatum game. You won't be able to talk about Jason Tatum's career without bringing that one up.
Yeah, that's huge. And then just the sample size now of Tatum stepping up in huge key elimination games. Hopefully the next step is to step up in like the games prior to not put yourself in that position.
Yes.
That would be I'd love to see. But like we've seen enough of it now. Like just game 6 and game 7 against Philly recently, sprained his ankle in game 7 against the Heat. So unfortunately we didn't get to see it there. He came out with really good energy in that game, although that did happen in the first possession, so it's probably a bullshit statement.
But he went to the rim and got fouled. That's what we want to see. Yeah,
exactly. So of all the criticism that Tatum sort of takes throughout the regular season of not being a consistent shooter, maybe turning the ball over more than you would like, he has been very consistent in those moments. And that's more than you can say about a lot of his peers, like Luka Doncic, like Joel Embiid, etc. So if I could pick, Booker, if I could pick one trait for my superstar to have, it's like show up when we effing need you in the playoffs. So that's huge. I have what do I have next? Oh, the Kyrie, IT, Crowder / Zizic trade, which I've got a clip for right here.
Michael Lee's back here with you on SportsCenter, continuing our breaking news coverage of a potential trade between the Celtics and the Cavs that would basically swap the starting point guards for the two teams that faced off in last year's Eastern Conference Finals. Kyrie Irving going to Boston, Isaiah Thomas going to Cleveland, along with some other players and a draft pick. You take a look at these two players in terms of their head-to-head stat production. You sort of have similar players when you go inside the box score in terms of points per game. Isaiah scored.
So this was tough. This is maybe in my life one of the more acute times of feeling like an avalanche of emotions from either end of the spectrum at the same time. And it's almost like a do you remember where you were when moment. I was, like I've said many times on this pod, news breaks in the morning here in Australia, which would be the afternoon or the evening in the States. I was on the train going across the Sydney Harbour Bridge when I lived in North Sydney, going to work when the news broke as I was on the bridge. And it was like a guffaw moment. Like Isaiah Thomas had just given his heart and soul to the Celtics. His sister China passed away on the eve of the first round of the playoffs. While I was in Boston, I was in games 1 and 2 in TD Garden for that series. A lot of emotion in the arena and so much gratitude and appreciation from the fans to Isaiah Thomas. I was in game 6 for the "it's a wrap for these motherfuckers" game in Chicago. Not as much gratitude and appreciation from those fans in Chicago, but for me, certainly there was an outpouring of such. And then for all of that to go down as it did, for Isaiah Thomas to finish top 5 in MVP voting, and then for him to be ruthlessly traded for our enemy who had just eliminated us from the playoffs, Kyrie Irving, it was unreal. But Spoonie, through all of that, I was like, it's fucking Kyrie Irving.
Oh yeah,
I'm kind of stoked right now. Do you remember how you felt at the time?
Yeah, I remember like basically being like, oh, that's kind of sad, but it's Kyrie fucking Irving. Like
Yes.
I was all in on that trade. I thought it was a genius move. I mean, I figure you got to assume IT's injury. There was like reports bouncing back and forth about how bad it was, and some were saying it's really bad. But that said, I have absolutely nothing related to Kyrie on my list. I just can't do it, Ben. If anything, he set the franchise back. I just can't do it, man.
I fully agree. I have nothing else.
Yeah.
Other than acquiring him was seismic and
It
notable.
was.
Yeah.
It was.
All right. Well, let's move on then. We don't want to talk about Kyrie Irving. What else you got?
I have that rookie Tatum, that IT, or not IT rather, the rookie Tatum playoff run, which we kind of talked about already, but with Rozier and Jalen and old Al Horford, but not that old then, but we thought he was, but now he's really old. Just absolutely coming out of nowhere. I remember I bet one of my friends is a Sixers fan, and I remember going into that, they were minus 330 favorites to win that series, which is insane.
Yeah.
And I was like, how about if the Celtics get it to game 7, you owe me, or if they win, you owe me. And if Philly wins in 6 or less, I owe you. And he's like, okay, deal. And they beat him in 5.
And felt like a good deal for your friend at the time.
Oh yeah, he was all about it. But one of my favorite moments is when Marcus Morris does the 3-0 right in Embiid's face, dude. It was just the best. So that was a great year. That was a really fun run. And it was like the first time Tatum showing up on that stage. It's like, okay, we've really got something with this dude.
Just that, even that late regular season run heading into the playoffs, like the Jaylen Brown game winner off the Shemi Ojeleye assist in Utah. That was incredible. Just awesome run heading into that playoff series, or the playoff run rather. That's a really good one. I've scrubbed off Isaiah Thomas from my list because we talked about it through the lens of the Isaiah Thomas acquisition trade, but probably just need to pause and acknowledge Isaiah Thomas as one of the most important aspects of the Celtics in the last 10 years. Again, I mentioned finishing 5th in MVP voting in 2017. Just the whole king of the fourth thing. Just the whole, who is this guy? What superpower does he have at 5'9" that he's like finishing, offhand layups around Rudy Gobert and just carrying this team to, the 1 seed at times. We have the number 1 defense, despite him playing 35 minutes plus a game, which nowadays just seems insane. I don't know, if you could speak to this, Spoonie, as far as the evolution of NBA offenses, but it just feels like that would not be sustainable in this day and age. And yet it wasn't that long ago, but he was just such a cultural figurehead for the Celtics. And even though, championships weren't won, never made it to the finals, if we hung banners for cultural pylons for this team, Isaiah would be front and center.
Yeah, I love that. Cultural pylons, Ben. That's beautiful, man. I think teams do a lot better job so everyone tried to attack IT at the point of attack, right? Put him in the pick and roll and go at him. But he's actually not bad on ball. His size just hurts him, right? So what teams do now, and I think Cleveland absolutely brutalized us with in the playoffs, is running him off ball. And you can really get him all mixed up, get post ups, get him in bad positions around the rim, switch, get the rim protectors out and IT down low, and then you're getting offensive rebounds. So there's ways to exploit it. Teams did not do it a ton in the regular season. They started to in the playoffs. So I agree. I don't think it would be tenable anymore, but but I'm glad we snuck it in right before teams really figured out how to attack him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now that technically wasn't my turn, so I am going to take a turn.
Okay.
And there's at least one guy or girl out there listening being like, why have you not mentioned Kelly Olynyk, Game 7, the game of his life against the Washington Wizards?
Bradley will get it to the big man. Shot clock is down to 4. Olynyk goes to work. Porter there defensively. Olynyk gets the roll. Thomas, the jab step. Olynyk a 3. Oh, Kelly Olynyk, the game of his life.
What can you say?
Makes no sense. I mean, I have drafting Kelly Olynyk as number 1 on my list, so we'll get to him. But
yeah, nice. I don't know. I don't know if we need to expand on this. Everyone knows what we're talking about.
Yeah. Fun times. Very fun game. And the sort of the cherry on top of what was a fun run, because like, I don't know about you, but I had zero hope going into that Cleveland series. I was like, all right, good season, boys. Time to pack it in. Yeah.
I had very little hope going into the Washington series.
Yeah.
I think that's what made that whole stretch so enjoyable. I mean, it goes back to the whole expectations thing that we always talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I've got this one, the bubble playoff run. Like we were talking about, like Kemba, proof of concept with the Jays on the wing, and getting to the Eastern Conference Finals with those guys at like 22 and 23 or 21 and 22, especially with Gordon Hayward getting hurt and like Kemba kind of really being on one leg at times. You're completely led by your 2 young stars, Brad Wanamaker's like your second guy off the bench, and they still got to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think like goes back to that idea, the proof of concept, like they proved it in the bubble that you can build a championship level team around these 2 guys. And I just think that's really, really important for our decision making from that point on.
Yeah, the OG Anunoby was at the game 3 over Taco Fall's outstretched hand, like the most outstretched of hands in humanity. He hits it over that hand, and then the fight back to like still win it in 7 despite almost going up 3-0. I remember the Kemba Walker bounce pass to Daniel Tice, just the play prior to the OG shot was like an underrated play. That's also in limbo. I've got that word now queued up because we lost that game. Very, very stressful playoff run there. And just weird vibes given the bubble. But I bought that book recently. I think it's by Ben Golliver. I hope I've got the author right about just the NBA bubble and the logistics behind it. Still reading breaks of the game though, so I haven't gotten to it, but I'm looking forward to cracking that one open. But nice. Yeah, that's a good one. I'll just put, moving on, drafting the Jays. Pretty big deal, I think, as I run some clips here of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on draft nights, on their respective draft nights. You know, with this whole discussion being centered around what came out of, beyond the Brooklyn trade, these are the 2 major pieces of that. Like, ultimately it was worthwhile trading Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett because we got Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Pretty amazing. And if you look at the reactions to the Nets trade at the time, everyone was shaking their heads from Boston's perspective. Bill Simmons, most notably, just like, what is going on? Why would we make this trade? And then to look back now, 10 years on, and be like, well, we've got these 2 all NBA players who pair quite well together, who have made the finals, which I'm sure we'll get to, who have dueled in a very entertaining manner in the All-Star game more than once on opposing teams. It's a lot of fun as Cookie, Wayne Spooty's cat, makes an appearance, if you're marking off your first of the floor bingo card there. Just of everything from the last 10 years, watching these guys be drafted, grow up, and flourish, as Spooty just struggles massively with the cat there. Watching these guys flourish and become who they are as people and as all NBA players has maybe been the most enjoyable and fulfilling part of my like sports fandom in my life so far. And I don't think that I'm over exaggerating there.
How is this not 1 for you? Because I have drafting Jason Tatum as number 1 on my list. I think that's by far the most important thing that's happened since the Brooklyn. So how are these guys not 1, Ben? Like you just said it. That's like,
I'm getting close to the end of my list. I've got a few more, But I think it's what these guys went on to do, and we've still got a few things to get to.
Okay,
That's
all
sort of
right, I like
higher
that.
in my list. But this is certainly the starting point. So interesting. But I think we're both circling in on our top
Yeah.
points, I think, by the sound of it. So we've both got a few more to go. So what have you got next, Bernie?
Okay, so I have drafting Marcus Smart next.
Oh, nice.
A foundational piece of, this new era of Celtics basketball. We painfully just traded him, but you talk about culture setters, for better or worse. Marcus was the culture for a long time on this team. He's never missed the playoffs in his entire NBA career, and I don't think that's a coincidence, right? Like, Marcus Smart plays winning basketball. He shows up in the playoffs. He loved the city. He's awesome in the community. So just, I think, a really, really important piece to the Celtics and to Celtics history, despite not getting over the hump and winning the finals. But just for the record, I did have Tatum after him on my list. So
I think there's going to be a few contentious points. Like you had some important stuff, and then I hit you with the Jeff Green 2013 game winner. So that's what it's all about. It's all a lot of fun here. But let us know in the comments, what you think and how you feel about this very disjointed draft, reverse ranking, unorganized, spoke about the day before situation we've got going on here. I'll piggyback off this, and then I'll take another turn just in the interest of time. So I had Marcus Smart winning DPOY in 2022.
All right.
So the second Celtic to win it. So KG won it in 2008. The first guard since Gary Payton in 1996. Smart in that year ranked third in steals among all players, fourth in loose balls recovered, 10th in charges and deflections, and he led the Celtics number one ranked defense with a defensive rating of 106.2, which is just insane. And a very, very good offensive point guard under Ime Udoka as well. So let me just piggyback a couple on top of that. And I'm just going to attempt to sandwich a few things here. So I'll start with the downside, and these are both coaching related. So the downside, the Ime Udoka situation, which I think we may not yet realize, or maybe only just becoming to realize, depending on how the first half of this season goes, how much of an important seismic thing that could end up being. Listening to, and this is probably what this is heavily influenced by, listening to Grant Williams. He did 2 podcasts. He did Theo Pinson's podcast and he did JJ Redick's podcast all within the last week. And he talked about the differences between Ime Udoka and Joe Mazzulla. And if you can listen to that and take the situational elements out of that and just listen to it from the perspective of here's what I think about Coach A and here's what I think about Coach B. Coach A sounds a lot better. Ime Udoka sounds, in theory, like a much better coach as far as how he empowered his players. And guys like Marcus Smart and Grant Williams really, really succeeded around him, while the Jays were able to sort of have the freedom to just continue doing what they can do regardless of leadership because they're just that talented. And that sounded like puzzle pieces fitting together in a much more harmonious way than what we've seen so far with Joe Mazzulla. And then, you've got to go on and call out all the stuff about Joe Mazzulla being thrust into this situation a week before the season started and all of that. So I acknowledge all of that. But I worry that the Ime Udoka situation might end up long-term be something that we look back on and be like, oh, we had it. We made the finals. And then Udoka, he did us dirty. He did the players dirty, did the fans dirty. Really hate that guy now because we just had a good thing going. And, there's more people out there within the Celtics organization who justifiably hate him a lot more than I could ever imagine doing so. And that's rightfully so. But yeah, I worry how seismic a thing that could be looking back on. So the Ime Udoka situation. The other thing is hiring Brad Stevens.
That's next for me as well.
Yeah. This is actually second in my list of the most important Celtics happenings in the last 10 years. Hiring Brad Stevens. I do have a little clip here of a very fresh-faced young Brad Stevens being interviewed on his first media appearance since being hired by the Celtics.
Obviously, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. I certainly have a lot of thanks to dole out. Starting with my family and Brady and Kinsley and my mom are upstairs watching this and Tracy as well. And mentioned that she is my attorney. And for those of you who haven't heard me say this before, I'm the only coach in the country that pays 100% to his agent. So that's the way that works and has always worked.
So Absolute child, baby-faced Brad Stevens. He's younger there than I think you and I are now, Spoonie, which is a little bit
Oh
terrifying.
man, yeah.
So the importance of the Brad Stevens hiring. So I think he is now the backbone of Celtics culture, and you only have to look at his interview when he was hired as president of basketball operations, where he just harped on about Celtics culture and wanting to win it for the Celtics and their fans. And yes, they go into that stuff with like an idea of what they need to say to appease the fan base, but it felt heartfelt, and it felt like he kind of got what Celtics like get out of their relationship. Sorry, Celtics fans get out of their relationship with the team. Going back a few years, the Hayward connection, obviously that ended up being a factor in what ultimately didn't work out. But at the time, it was the tipping point for us acquiring Gordon Hayward. And then just smaller things like Doc Rivers being traded to the Clippers for a first round pick, which is insane.
Yeah.
And then Kevin O'Connor, who was writing for Celtics blog at the time of the hiring of Brad Stevens, wrote, quote, Stevens is known for implementing complicated defensive schemes and has spent a great deal of time using analytics at Butler. And so it was this huge shift from the Doc Rivers, like Ubuntu, I know you want to win, but you got to do it together. Thing of like, yeah, I know you want to win. And like, here's the numbers to back up like our approach here, guys. So let's maybe try this. So huge.
Yeah, Brad's way up there. I only have two left, and they're basically the same thing. But yeah, I had Brad just before drafting Jaylen Brown and drafting Jason Tatum on my list. So huge, great coach, incredible coach, and maybe kind of carving a better resume as the president of basketball operations. I mean, he's made very few false steps in his role as the president. So we will see. He just made a massive step that, like, I don't know if his job will be on the line if it goes poorly, but this is a big gamble with the Porzingis trade. So Brad is not afraid to make moves, right? I was afraid he might be a little too conservative as the president. It is the complete opposite.
I think it's just like almost 10 years of like brutal frustration of the personnel that he had to coach, that he's like just going in all guns blazing as the man pulling the trigger on the trades there. Spoonie, I sandwiched a couple together there, so I'll let you take the final one here.
Yeah, so these are basically the same thing, but I had them separately. So the first one is the run to the finals. I think it's just very, very rare for your NBA team to make the finals. It really, unless you have LeBron or Curry, it really does not happen that much. It has not happened much for the Celtics in my lifetime. That is, I mean, I think I was alive for a couple in the 80s, but really my living memory, it has happened 3 times, and I will cherish every time it happens. So it was just really cool to be in the finals. But also I added very specifically game 3 of the NBA finals. You know, you and I were there. We've talked about it on the pod, so I won't, get into too much detail, but like walking out of the Garden up 2-1, just like with all the hope in the world and the expectation we were going to win the NBA finals, was like literally one of the best days of my life. Bar some real seismic, life-changing stuff like having a kid. But it's way up there. It's way up there. And it was a crazy run. Everybody stepped up at different times, and then they just kind of ran out of gas after that game 3. But that is something that I will remember for the rest of my life. So way up there.
And you can check that out on our YouTube channel as well. There's a vlog style video, as I was just in the early stages of figuring out like video editing and stuff like that. So it's a little bit rough, but it's a good sort of encapsulation of me and Spoonie's game 3 experience and my sort of broader experience visiting Boston at that time. Fully agree. Game 3 of the finals, just probably the peak, right? As far as like it was kind of all like downhill in a bad way from there. I was at game 4. I was sitting behind the Warriors bench. I've spoken about this on the podcast as well, so I'll be brief. And we were up 9-ish in the 4th quarter, and the vibe around the Garden was like, we're about to go back to Golden State, to San Fran, up 3-1. Like, this is in the bag. And then I just remember watching so close, so firsthand, Steph Curry do what he did. And, I talked about like the duality of emotions with the Isaiah Thomas trade and Kyrie Irving before. Watching that game as a Celtics fan, knowing what was going to happen before it happened, but as a basketball fan, watching Steph Curry go completely out of his mind and win that game solo was like, I I was able to actually step outside of myself and appreciate what Steph Curry was doing in that time, just because it was so insane on that stage on the road, but also ultimately brutal. And I think it took me a while to sort of like recover from that and like figure out like how to say that and how I felt about it. But yeah, I had just the Celtics making the finals because as far as like a highlight and something to celebrate, watching Al Horford sort of pound the floor, having finally gotten over that sort of hump in his career was huge. Watching Jason Tatum win the inaugural Larry Bird MVP trophy, and now with Smart gone, just watching Marcus Smart and the Jays like hug and celebrate in that trophy ceremony, like that's just something that we're gonna love and cherish for years to come. So I think that's us at the end of our lists, Spoonie. I think we've culminated in the Celtics basically making the finals, which I think is accurate. That's the culmination so far. Hopefully not ultimately in the Brad Stevens P-Boy, president of basketball operations
Pobo
era. Pobo, thank you. P-Boy. I don't know where I got that from.
Whoa.
Pobo era and the Jays, of course. So hopefully it's not the ultimate culmination, but certainly the culmination of this podcast. Were there any honorable mentions, Spoonie, that we didn't get to?
A lot of what you had were on the honorable mentions for me.
Likewise.
So yeah, nothing I can really think of off the top of my head. I guess low points, Aaron Nesmith getting traded. I just saw him in that video for a second. So seismic shift. Yeah. We haven't made the final since. So
yeah.
But yeah, no, I can't think of much to be honest with you, man. I think that was a pretty good list. I think we hit just about everything. Like depending on how you feel about Kyrie, because you could like the S my D era, like the 17-2, ripping that off. But I'm with you, Ben. I'm with you. Yeah.
It's all in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
At the time, you'd be like, "This is amazing. We love this guy." Anti-establishment, and like, "Oh, hang on a second, backpedal a little bit. Let's step away from associating with this man." Cool. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just a classic off-season pod in typical first of the floor fashion. We'll be back towards the end of the week and poised, as always, to jump on if any major news does occur. If you enjoyed the show, help us fight the algorithm. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Wayne Spoonie, love your work, mate. Until next time, go Celtics.